Hello, Gene Schwimmer here. Welcome to today's vlog. We'll be focusing on politics today, but before we get to that, I just want to focus briefly on a story I did yesterday about Israel, specifically Israeli scientists promising a coronavirus vaccine in 90 days. That obviously is very good news, and just to be clear, as I understand the article, we're not talking about a vaccine available for testing. We're talking about a vaccine available to the public for use. Obviously, that is very good news. Nothing really to add to that. I just want to follow up with this article that I saw today. It's an editorial. It's very, well, it makes a very good point. I have to explain first BDS, in case you don't know what BDS is. I'm sure a lot of you do, maybe all of you know, but BDS stands for Boycott, Divest, Sanction, and it's about Israel. It's about the extreme left, well, maybe the extreme right too. It's about Israel haters, Jew haters too. They're very much the same thing most of the time, calling on the public to boycott Israeli products, or at least ones that are over the armistice line, the 1949 armistice line, what's also known as the West Bank, and also the proper names are Judea and Samaria. And then to divest, if you're, say, a university with stock in an Israeli company, to divest yourself, to sell that stock. And then sanction is to pass laws to punish Israel. So here's the headline, quote, BDS this, unquote. Israel makes, quote, exciting breakthrough, unquote, in race for coronavirus vaccine. Israeli scientists are reportedly only a few weeks away from having developed the first vaccine to combat the coronavirus, which originated in China, and could have the vaccine available 90 days after that. Well, according to this, then, it's more than 90 days, a few weeks from developing the vaccine, and then 90 days after that, making it available to the public. Still a very short time period, but as you can tell from the headline, a very obvious point to make is those BDSers, those people who want to boycott Israeli products, okay, does that include this vaccine? You're going to wait a year, possibly a year and a half, for the United States to have a vaccine on the market available to the public. Do you hate Israel that much? That's the point of the article. I think it's a very good point, so I wanted to share that. Now on to the main subject for today. It's really three articles that I want to discuss, but they're all basically about the same point, and it's a possible danger signal to the Trump administration if you've been following the stock market because of this coronavirus panic. And that's what it is at this point, at least in the United States, because 16,000 people have died from the flu, from the ordinary flu that comes every year. So far, this flu season, 16,000 people have died from it. Nobody has died from the coronavirus. 15 people were quarantined and or isolated, and all but one have been released. So again, the news is very good for us, but the markets have, well, I said they were plunging and panicking, but, well, it's still closed down today, but it's very interesting. I've been watching the market all day. The Dow opened about 1,000 points down. It closed, I can't see my computer screen from here, from the camera, but it looks like maybe 400 points down. In other words, it came up a lot. So maybe this story that I'm about to tell you will be old news, or will be irrelevant next week, which is good if you're a Trump supporter, because, well, I first want to mention the Rasmussen poll that I've quoted in the past. This is the main danger sign that I see for a potential Trump loss, for him losing the election. I've been quoting it 2 or 3 times the last few days that Trump, well, he had been alternating between 49 and 50%, and then the last couple of days he was up to 52%. But today he is back down to 47%. That is a one-day loss from 52% yesterday, which was Thursday, to 47% today, Friday, the day I'm recording this video. And you have to keep in mind, as I've mentioned in the past to describe what's so valuable about the Rasmussen poll, number one, it's of likely voters, and number two, that it's a 3-day moving average. So the result is not just one day's polling, but Rasmussen takes the present day's polling, combines it with the previous 2 days' polling to come up with an average. That means that if he was 52% yesterday and he is down to 47% today, that means one of these days, possibly yesterday, the most recent poll, would have to have been, just as a matter of mathematics, below 47%, possibly, depending on what the day before that was, possibly significantly below 47%. The only good news I can find in that is that Obama's rating, as he was campaigning for re-election on this very same day in 2012, was also 47%. So right now, Trump is where Obama was, same numbers, and of course, Obama was re-elected. The next item I want to share here, this is speculation as I'm reading these results today, but this is Friday. Tomorrow, Saturday, is the South Carolina primary, so you will have known the actual result on Monday when you're seeing this vlog. But I still think it makes an important point. If you've been watching the polls, Biden has been pulling ahead. He is way up, according to one poll, in South Carolina. That is the primary that will be held on Saturday. It looks like he has also pulled ahead in Florida. When I say ahead, I mean ahead of Sanders, because it's basically a contest right now between Sanders and Biden. Obviously, or one would suspect that it's better for Trump to face Sanders in the election. He's an out-and-out socialist. He's got some very radical ideas, radical and expensive ideas. Biden would be harder to beat. Until today's Rasmussen poll, I would still say no problem. But if we go into a recession, if the coronavirus scare was just a trigger for this massive stock market sell-off, if the coronavirus, whether that was a trigger or not, continues to the point that we have trouble with our suppliers, or that our companies have trouble with our suppliers. In other words, if the economy goes down, somebody like Biden could be a viable alternative to Trump. That is why it's concerning if Biden is pulling ahead. Now, the website 538 that I've mentioned in the past, what 538 does, they're a kind of a projection or an odds website. They look at past polls and they use those polls to make projections. And the way they make their projections, by the way, is they run tens of thousands every day by computer, tens of thousands of simulated elections, or in this case, simulated primary elections, and then come up with a percentage. In other words, the percentage of the simulations that show Biden beating Sanders, those are the odds that 538 gives a particular candidate of winning the primary. Or in the case of the table I'm about to show you, it projects the number of delegates that the candidate would get. Now, 538, I link, by the way, I always do this, I link to the articles in the comments section so you can read the whole article, because what 538 did, in this case, made 3 projections depending on how South Carolina turns out for Biden. Whether he wins big, barely wins, or loses, what does that mean for him going forward? I'm only going to talk about whether Biden wins big, because that is what could most hurt Trump, could most help Biden against Sanders. That's what I'm talking about, increasing the odds that Biden will be the candidate. So I'm just going to talk about that one. But if you want to know all 3 scenarios, then again, I link to the article in the description. Now, yesterday, I believe it was only yesterday, I talked about the betting websites, bettors, people who put their money where their mouths are in predicting primary election results. They are betting, or they were as of yesterday, and I believe it's still true today, betting that of the 14 Super Tuesday primary states, that Sanders would win 13 out of the 14. But now we have from 538, and keep in mind that this is not a betting website. This is based on past polls and computer simulations. But it shows Biden pulling ahead in a number of states. If you look at this table, and you can see in Texas he's ahead now, in, well, all the southern states that are going to be voting in Super Tuesday, Tennessee, Alabama, Virginia, Arkansas. Bottom line, instead of, as had been projected, Sanders coming out of a Super Tuesday with a very wide lead in delegates, what 538 shows now, based on their projections, is that Sanders would still be ahead. He would have 578 delegates, but Biden would have 430. That is a very much, obviously, smaller margin. With a margin like that, if that carries forward, and there are literally thousands of delegates still to be awarded between now and the Democratic convention, conceivably Biden could win enough delegates to be the nominee on the very first ballot. If not, it greatly increases his odds in a brokered convention. I'm going to get to that in a second. I just want to mention that what I was saying a minute ago about the possibility of the economy hurting Trump. Here's this headline: Republicans growing nervous about 2020 economy. Republicans who have been counting on a roaring economy to power President Trump and the GOP congressional candidates on Election Day are growing nervous because of the economic havoc wreaked by the coronavirus. This is exactly what I'm talking about, because in every rally, Trump has been boasting about the record stock market. There's plenty of time between now and the election in November for the market to turn around. We've had this enormous plunge, something like 4,000 points just this week, but it happened, just this week, within a few days. It's possible for the market to pick back up between then and November. Very possible. But you can see why the Republicans would be worried, or any Trump supporter. I, full disclosure, am a Trump supporter. I'm not a Republican. I'm an independent, but I am planning to vote for Trump. And by the way, as you saw from that table that I showed you a little while ago, Tennessee is one of the Super Tuesday states. I am reasonably confident that Trump will be the Republican nominee. So as I said in an earlier vlog, I am going to vote for Sanders in the primary. It's an open primary. I can vote in either one. I'm going to vote for Sanders on Tuesday. I hope I don't live to regret it and that Sanders doesn't win the election, but I think he would be the easiest for Trump to beat. But there are other reasons too. There's a principle that I believe that Sanders was robbed in 2016, that he should have been the nominee. That, well, we know because the chairwoman of the Democratic National Committee, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, was forced to resign because she put her thumb on the scales for Hillary Clinton in 2016. Let me throw in one more reason why I'm voting for Sanders in the primary, and that reason is I believe that Sanders represents what the Democratic Party really believes, what the Democrats hide or try to hide in every election to seem more moderate than they are, and then they get into power, and then we get Obamacare, we get all kinds of far left policies that were not talked about by the Democratic candidate in the election. But with Sanders as the nominee, there will be no running and hiding. There will be no denying this is, well, they can try to deny it, but if Bernie gets the nomination, I don't know how you deny that this is today's Democratic Party. And now we get to the possibility of a brokered convention. Of course, if it's not a brokered convention, then whoever has gotten enough delegates to be elected or nominated on the first ballot, that's the nominee for the Democratic Party in the election. But if you have a brokered convention, then you have the question of whom does the convention nominate. Bernie Sanders is saying that even if nobody has enough votes to get the nomination on the first ballot to win the nomination outright, the candidate with the most votes should be the nominee. You have all the other candidates and the Democratic elite saying, no, the process should be the normal process, which depends in a brokered convention on people bargaining and candidates combining their votes. And then you have on the second ballot, if a nominee is not chosen on the first ballot, you have the superdelegates who can come in and tilt the scales one way or the other and decide with their votes who the nominee will be. But if Sanders has the most votes and they choose another candidate, the Sanders voters, by all indications, are going to be hopping mad. They may sit out the election, they may even vote for Trump, or worst case scenario, they might riot. You could have a riot just like in 1968. You had this terrible riot in the Chicago convention, outside the Chicago convention. These are the same far left people, these Sanders supporters, so that's a possibility. Nevertheless, let me put up the headline: Democratic leaders willing to risk party damage to stop Bernie Sanders. Interviews with dozens of Democratic Party officials, including 93 superdelegates, found overwhelming opposition to handing Mr. Sanders the nomination if he fell short of a majority of delegates. And I just saw another article just a short while ago, I'm not going to put the headline up, but saying that a majority of superdelegates have said that they will do everything that they can to block Sanders, regardless of what it does to the Democratic Party and their chances of winning in 2020. They think it will help them going forward, or at least avoiding the damage they anticipate going forward if the party nominates Sanders. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Senator Chuck Schumer, the minority leader, hear constant warnings from allies about congressional losses in November if the party nominates Bernie Sanders for president. And officials in the national and state parties are increasingly anxious about splintered primaries on Super Tuesday and beyond, where the liberal Mr. Sanders edges out moderate candidates who collectively win more votes. And that's, by the way, what happened, of course, in the 2016 Republican primaries, where you had Trump and you had a number of other candidates who refused to drop out, splitting the vote. Had some of them dropped out, especially I'm thinking of John Kasich, if they had dropped out, it's probable, at least possible, that Cruz would have been the nominee, Ted Cruz. But getting back to the Democrats, same thing. You have all these candidates who refuse to drop out, and that's allowing Sanders to get the most delegates, but that also presents the possibility that I just mentioned in a brokered convention of several of those candidates getting together and putting their votes together if they can stop arguing among themselves and decide on one person to be the candidate, or an alternative, depending on how far short Sanders is for one of the other candidates to agree to combine his votes with Sanders in return for getting the vice presidential slot. So there are all sorts of possibilities going into that convention. But getting back to the quotes here, dozens of interviews with Democratic establishment leaders this week show that they are not just worried about Mr. Sanders' candidacy, but are also willing to risk intra-party damage to stop his nomination at the national convention in July if they get the chance. Since Mr. Sanders' victory in Nevada's caucuses on Saturday, the Times, this would be the New York Times, has interviewed 93 party officials, all of them superdelegates, who could have a say on the nominee at the convention, and found overwhelming opposition to handing the Vermont senator the nomination if he arrived with the most delegates but fell short of a majority. Such a situation may result in a brokered convention, a messy political battle, the likes of which Democrats have not seen since 1952, when the nominee was Adlai Stevenson. Jay Jacobs, the New York State Democratic Party chairman and a superdelegate, echoing many others interviewed, said that superdelegates should choose a nominee they believe had the best chance of defeating Mr. Trump if no candidate wins the majority of delegates during the primaries. Mr. Sanders argued that he should become the nominee at the convention with a plurality of delegates to reflect the will of voters, and that denying him the nomination would enrage his supporters and split the party for years to come. Supporters of Mr. Sanders said that blocking him from the nomination, if he had the most delegates, would repel progressives and would deliver a second term to Mr. Trump. Quote, if Bernie gets a plurality and nobody else is even close, and the superdelegates weigh in and say, quote, we know better than the voters, unquote, I think that will be a big problem, unquote, said Representative Pramila Jayapal of Washington State, a Sanders supporter who is co-chairwoman of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, which, to me, putting that into English, it's saying, nice convention you've got there, Democrats. Would hate to see something happen to it. Whether something does happen to it, we'll have to wait and see. I will know more after Super Tuesday, but it looks like it's going to be very interesting, at least on the Democratic side, going forward. So stay tuned and watch my vlogs. I'll keep you all up to date. In the meantime, thumbs up if you like this video. Share it with anybody you think would also like the video. Got any comments? You can put them in the comment section below the video, as well as any questions you might have, suggestions for future topics. You could subscribe. I love getting new subscribers, so subscribe, subscribe, subscribe. And finally, come back and see me again. I look forward to seeing all of you again. And until I do see all of you again, bye.